So welcome everyone. Welcome to our webinar. We're really excited to have you with us today to present this joint work between the Digital Cooperation Organization, DCO and Whiteshield, looking at the metaverse and the policy implications for a new digital frontier. We've got a great lineup of panelists to walk you through and discuss the results of the paper and to have a discussion about some critical metaverse topics, if you will. But maybe first, before I introduce our fine panelists, maybe just a few logistics pieces, if you will. So as you know, that a lot of the work in this discussion will be centered around this jointly authored white paper, if you will. You can actually access the white paper itself. So we've got the QR code. You can see it at least on the bottom left, of your screen. That'll take you to the DCO website library, where you'll be able to access it, download it, and obviously read it very, very thoroughly, as would be good for you to do. Second, during the webinar itself, we'd ask you to participate, to show at least a small poll looking at some of the challenges of the webinar itself. So we'll post that up to get a little bit as well of your direct feedback, looking at some of the challenges in terms of the metaverse development, if you will. Third piece is the webinar will be recorded. And that the full YouTube video itself will be available on DCO's website. I'm sure shared through social media, both in terms of DCO and as well through Whiteshield as well. And then finally, at the end, of course, we don't want just in terms of discussion of the panelists, but to have a Q&A session at the end where everyone can submit any sorts of questions that they have via the Zoom chat itself. As I said, we're quite excited to have you here, talk about this, topic, present at least some initial thoughts, and ideas, and hopefully it'll spur some, good discussion, I would say, between the panelists and then obviously yourselves in terms of the attendees with some nice questions. So let me introduce at least the panelists themselves. So very quickly, Tom Flynn, partner at Whiteshield. Whiteshield itself, a public policy firm, with one of the facets being the intersection between digital analytics and policy area. And that's why we're so thrilled as well to work together with our colleagues, from DCO about the paper itself. We've got Ahmad Bhinder, who's a policy innovation director at DCO itself. So Ahmed has been serving in this particular capacity, spearheading digital policy initiatives and supporting kind of this cooperation among the DCO members themselves. A strong, obviously, expertise in terms of policy, regulation, with a strong focus in terms of technology. Actually, I think, Ahmed, you've got in terms of a technical background too, in terms of master's degree in telecommunications and electronics engineering, if I remember correctly, in terms of the bachelor. So bring, I think, both in terms of the policy side, the cooperation, and then the technical expertise, which is quite great. Then we have Dr. Christina Yan Zhang, who's actually CEO at the Metaverse Institute itself. So Dr. Christina, of course, brings very, very strong expertise overall in the field of Metaverse policy development in Metaverse, and even the history and development of Metaverse. So we're looking quite forward to hear her insights across multiple topics. And then Philippe Nahas, partner as well at Whiteshield, and head of actually Whiteshield's digital practice. An expert, particularly in linking, I think, in terms of the digital side and actually digital and technical development with the policy sphere and policy development itself. So overall, maybe just a briefing very quickly about the session itself. So Ahmed will present, to us kind of an overview about the paper itself, defining the metaverse, kind of some core attributes in terms of the metaverse, its development, some of the challenges, and then use cases to situate us, I'd say, about the discussion itself. And then we'll cover some specific topics, related to that in terms of arriving at, kind of this human-centric metaverse itself, looking at some particular use cases, the tech infrastructure for the metaverse, and then how we can shape the metaverse, collectively itself. And then we'll take some Q&A at the end. But maybe without further ado, I'd pass it over to you, Ahmed, and we can come here.
Thank you, Tom. Hello, everyone. Thanks for introducing me, Tom. I'm Ahmad Bhinder. I'm the Policy Innovation Director at the Digital Cooperation Organization. May I request the slides to be on, please, for the deck? Excellent. Thank you very much. So let me start by introducing the DCO. DCO is a global intergovernmental organization that is headquartered in Riyadh that aims to enable digital prosperity for all by accelerating the inclusive and sustainable growth of the digital economy. DCO firmly believes in the key role of transformative technologies like Metaverse towards building a sustainable, safe, and inclusive digital future for all. Next slide, please. Our current membership includes 15 member states that are spread across Africa, Middle East, Asia, and Europe. And we have a growing network of observers and knowledge partners that represent the private sector, international organizations, NGOs, academia, and civil society. Next slide, please. So today we are talking about the Metaverse. I think to have a common understanding of what Metaverse is, so Metaverse in simple terms is a combination of immersive digital spaces or worlds where humans can interact, play, work, create, and socialize using their virtual digital embodiments called avatars. There are evolutions, constant evolutions around these aspects that we have discussed. But so far, what we are aware of in terms of Metaverse is these aspects that I have just explained. So Metaverse, being one of the frontier digital technologies, is showing great economic potential. With investments over $120 billion in 2022, the Metaverse economy is estimated to grow from the current $84 billion to over $5 trillion by 2020 to 2030. And these are conservative estimates. There are estimates that would take it up to $13 trillion, for example. On the next slide, I will walk you through some of the key highlights of our white paper. As Tom has mentioned, DCO has jointly published a white paper in collaboration with Whiteshield, and that would be the core of our discussion today. The link is provided, so I really urge you to download the white paper, and the details will be in there. So in our white paper, we first took an attempt to defining the Metaverse, since there are multiple definitions going around due to the ongoing evolution and complexity of this concept. Our definition takes into consideration the historical evolution of the web through the lens of three distinct waves of technological development. Web 1.0 is the first one that emerged in the early 90s, and this is called the read-only web. It focused on the static consumption of the content that was produced predominantly by companies and institutions. So you would open the web pages and then you would get the information from them. There was no interaction involved. Web 2.0, which emerged in 2000s, can be termed as participative social web. It emphasizes the user-generated content and social networking, and the likes of Facebooks and YouTubes and all the interactive platforms that you can see are clubbed under this wave. The third wave, Web 3.0, which is now under progress, is the third wave of this evolutionary journey. It is characterized by the convergence of emerging technologies, bringing decentralization and AI-powered personalization for the users. So in the context of these three technological waves, we define Metaverse as a natural extension of this Web3, with a specific focus on enhancing the immersive aspect of the user experience through, for example, the technologies like AR and VR and digital twin for industrial uses specifically. Next slide, please. Yeah. Next slide, please. Yeah. So the Metaverse is a complex layered system that enables users to interact, create, and collaborate in a virtual ecosystem. We have tried to map some of these layers and their functionalities in our paper, which you can see on your screens. So the base layer, as expected, would consist of hardware, devices, and network infrastructure. The second layer corresponds to the familiar TCP/IP layer of the internet. The third layer encompasses the peer-to-peer protocols for the decentralized operation of the Web3 and Metaverse. The fourth layer implements the consensus protocols. The fifth layer would be for executing interactions and transactions like digital payments. And the sixth layer, being the primary user interface, would host a whole bunch of Metaverse applications on it. Next slide, please. So here we've mentioned some notable use cases of Metaverse and their transformative potential across various sectors, spanning from education, healthcare, entertainment, commerce, labor, and industrial production. Industrial production, for example, can be made safer and more efficient using the digital twin technology, which is the constituent technology of the Metaverse. Next slide, please. But this transformation comes at a cost. There are complexities and concerns that must be addressed to ensure a safe, sustainable, and inclusive metaverse for all. These complexities stem from a few things: our identity in the metaverse, the ownership and usage of digital goods and services in the metaverse, the way users transact and interact in the metaverse, and from various enablers of our collective experience in the metaverse. Some of the key challenges include digital identity, property rights and ownership, transacting and exchanging, accountability, security, interoperability, and digital inclusion, to name a few. Next slide, please. So to address these complexities, in our paper, we make numerous policy recommendations. These policy recommendations could be clubbed under two broad categories. So category one are on those that affect the wider ecosystem that enables the development and innovation around the metaverse. For example, the need for broader government support and the room for regulatory experimentation through sandboxes, etc. Korea is a good example of this. The government has announced there a range of initiatives to foster an enabling ecosystem for metaverse. These initiatives include, for example, creation of a metaverse academy, provision of dedicated facilities and metaverse hubs to support specialized companies, and facilitation of core immersive content and the technology development. Category 2 includes the recommendations that impact the user's immersive experience within the metaverse. This includes the need for example, rights protecting and safe use of the metaverse. The paper also discusses some of the potential and current limitations and challenges that are associated to specific metaverse use cases, and then presents policy considerations for each use case. Next slide, please. Finally, with an aim to understand on how policymakers can shape a human-centric, accessible, sustainable, and inclusive metaverse, the paper suggests a range of guiding principles that should be taken into consideration. These includes, for example, a human-centric and inclusive approach to policymakers, where the private entities and developers should be included from day one, avoiding excessive regulation of the emerging technologies, advocacy for global standards and standardization, rethinking of the traditional top-down approach towards policymaking, and the evidence-based approach that has been taken in the previous rounds of technologies. So with this, the quick summary of our work at the Metaverse comes to an end. And now I pass the floor back to Tom to take the discussion further, and we'll chip in further as the questions come. Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Ahmed. Thanks for that. I think the very concise and succinct, summary of where we're at, and to provide us, I think, with some baseline, I think for the discussion, moving forward. Maybe Dr. Christina, though, to turn to you. I hear, at least, from my perspective, yes, Metaverse is going to be large, a huge economy, different set, multiple different layers in terms of its development. But maybe even practically, how do we actually know when we arrive, at the metaverse itself? Do you see it as a, big inflection point, a turning point? Are we going to gradually, arrive in terms of the metaverse? It'd be great to hear a bit of the experience that at least from your expertise, as to when we'll actually know and kind of realize, that transition, if you will, to becoming in the metaverse. And then second, this idea about shaping the metaverse itself. I mean, we all know from different technologies that technology isn't necessarily inherent, necessarily good, nor is it necessarily bad, if you will. How can we, as Ahmed very nicely mentioned, confront different challenges or address different topics, to shape and to direct, this human-centric metaverse? It'd be great to hear your thoughts on these two pieces.
Thank you, Tom, for that very interesting questions. And firstly, I would like to congratulate both DCO and the Whiteshield for such really insightful white paper. I have read the whole one, and I find it's really, really useful. So I think you guys putting a lot of really great, analysis on how to make it work for government worldwide, which is very much needed at this moment. because as Ahmed, you have rightly pointed out, even for the definition of the metaverse, there's so much debate going on forever. So I think it's quite good to start with definition to see what is really metaverse for different governments, entities, etc. And go back to the question from Tom. We all know that the metaverse is nothing new, as already pointed out in your white paper, and it started in 1992 with Neil Stevens' Snow Crash. And the world's first metaverse platform is called Second Life, which was launched in 2003 by the San Francisco-based company called Linden Lab. So actually, the metaverse we're talking about now is already the second wave of the metaverse, which is very much like the major milestone is when Facebook changed the name into Meta in 2021. And then worldwide, we start to see extraordinary excitement of investments, energies coming to the place, and try to really looking at what are the effective use case to bring benefits and positive impacts to the wider society. So I think if in the future we can have a time to really make it more mainstream, I would say perhaps the most easy way to identify that will be through digital identity. Because for some people, they still think metaverse as, like avatars moving around, whether or not they have legs, right, in Horizon World. So actually the metaverse, as Ahmed and, our colleagues at Whiteshield has already pointed out, it's more than just a gaming platform. It's really perhaps the extension of Web3, where decentralization is at very center. So if in the future we can have our digital identity, which can be used seamlessly between the physical world we are in and the digital world we are in, and maybe that's not one metaverse, it can be multiple metaverse for different purposes. Some can be for healthcare, some can be for education and training, and some can be for public service of the smart city, etc. So if we have one digital identity, we can utilize for going through immigration control of different countries, as well as going through different world of metaverses. And then I think that's the time, perhaps it's an easy indicator to say metaverse has really arrived, because there's no clear boundary between the life we are living in the physical world and the digital world we are living. Yeah. So it's just like the slide has pointed out that. So one digital identity can be utilized for different functions, whether it's healthcare, smart cities, telecommunications, e-governments, social platforms, e-commerce, humanitarian response, travels, food, financial services. So that's how I see that actually metaverse arrived. But I think it will take some time, at least 10 years, I would say. Yeah.
Maybe Dr. Christina, before jumping to the next, maybe just a quick follow-up question. What do we actually need to do to see this digital identity? They talk all the time about this interoperability, for example, to move from the platforms to platforms. Is it a question in terms of standard setting? Is it in terms of the technology? And then what's the role of the government or private sector to actually push on this, as you so succinctly or nicely mentioned about the digital identity?
I think it's a very important question. And personally, I think we're traditionally talking about public-private partnership, PPP. But if we want to put people-centered in the equation and together with environment impact for the longer term, maybe the new term should called public, private, people, planet partnership. So that's 5P. And all of them need to come together to really ensure any kind of digital future we are creating now is really in line with the well-being of our citizens, as well as the well-being of our planet. Because there has been lots of interesting research and basically saying that based on the current consumption behavior of ordinary people on this planet, we need another 2.5 Earth to, sustain in the next 100 years. So clearly that's not easy to achieve unless we're thinking about emigrate to Mars like Elon Musk, etc. But in the short term, we need to thinking about how to create harmony between ourselves, between our cities, countries, and our planets. So I think that will be the key.
I think that fits into the second question I have, which was about, kind of this idea about this human-centric, metaverse, and how do we actually realize this, maybe a 3 or 4P, kind of analogy. But it'd be great maybe just to hear a little bit, about this and how to make sure that we actually realize this, as opposed to maybe some alternative scenarios, which maybe not as desirable.
I think at this moment, we need to go back to the very basics and the basic facts at this moment, according to the latest research and statistics from the United Nations, that 1/3 of the global population, they are still not connected with the internet. So that's a massive issue all of us need to address, because we do not really want there is a situation that some of us can benefit from the advancement of technology such as Metaverse, digital twins, AI, where still 1/3 of our population, they can't, and this kind of digital divide is even going any further, which is not good. But the great thing is we already have some solutions in place. So if we can go back to the previous slides about Elon Musk, Starlink, lower orbit satellites, please. So what he has been doing is basically he's using a large number of smaller satellites to create the broadband coverage in the world's most remote areas. And so far he has already covered, I think, about 40 countries with 2 million, users already. So, it's making major progress, but we still have like another 2.8 billion population offline. So maybe we should encourage more private sectors and governments to enter into the space to create the IT infrastructure of connectivity in the first place, especially in Africa, in certain part of Asia, where I know DCO has a very strong presence for membership. So maybe that's something we can do together. So that's the first issue. And the next issue, if we can go to the next slide, please. Another issue is there has been a lot of debates about, whether or not the presence of Metaverse is environmentally friendly or not. Some people will say the reduction of international travel, especially through airplane, using Metaverse to have conference, meetings, interactions, is going to reduce massively on the environment cost. But on the other side, we know to run any kind of large simulations, Metaverse needs to have 24/7, consistent presence in the digital world. We need huge computing power as well as like data center to support that. So the carbon emission from that part is quite massive. And also there are e-ways to do with like all the different like wearables, VR goggles, AR goggles, etc. So how can we make a balance? At this moment, there hasn't been any global analysis to look at the positive side and the negative side. So we need to maybe do that analysis to say how far we should push the technology for the well-being of human beings. Next slide, please. But at the same time, we all know there are some really exciting major breakthrough which had taken place in Japan and the United States. So there is a paper published in Nature magazine, one of the most prestigious academic journal of the world this year, looking at a new innovative nuclear fusion technology that can use non-radioactive materials to actually, produce electricity that can power the planet for another 100,000 years. And that's using this kind of technology to really have carbon emission-free electricity. So I think there are a lot of very promising technologies on the horizon we can utilize to address that, but we still need to have a more balanced debate. Next slide. And of course, there is huge debates about the rise of AI, its ethical considerations, etc. And the United Nations has just appointed a high-level advisory board on AI to working with all humanities to address how far should we really push that. And generative AI has actually become one of the most powerful building blocks of Metaverse to have text to 3D avatars, and text to 3D environments, and text to 3D objects. So how generative AI is going to develop in the years to come will be very crucial to the human-centric metaverse development. And I recall the godfather of AI, Dr. Geoffrey Hinton, he said in an interview with MIT Technology Review, and he said, I can have 10,000 neural networks, each having their own experience, and any of them can share what they learn instantly with the rest of them. And that's a huge difference. And we human beings can't do that. So he's a little bit worried that the machine can become a little bit smarter than the humans. So we might have some big issues here. So he resigned from Google and warning the whole human society that we need to have proper governance and framework put in place to ensure this is really ethical. Next slide. But again, I'm a very positive person. So I think even there is many issues we need to address. We need to see the positive side. There is already like very pragmatic solution in place. And according to Elon Musk, this gentleman is very forward-looking, we know. And he basically believes that using brain-computer interface can really address the issue of the rising, threats from AI. So what he has been doing is he eventually gets FDA approval from the US government to start human trial in June this year. So he's actively looking for volunteers to do invasive brain-computer interface, basically putting a chips in your brain and to cure all kinds of serious medical conditions, like people who are paralyzed, to help them to gain mobility again, and people who are blind to help them to get vision, and people who are suffering from loss of memory of Alzheimer's disease, he can bring back memories for them, which is really positive. But he's not even the first person or companies doing that. And there is another company in the United States called Syndrome, and they were backed by Bill Gates, as well as Jeff Bezos from Amazon, to looking at non-invasive brain-computer interface. So they are not using graphene, a very advanced material, to put the sensors inside your blood vessel and then connect that with your nerves in the brain. And now using this technology, they have already helped people who are not able to speak to looking at their computer screen and use this kind of non-invasive brain-computer interface to interact with their computer without even touching any, a keyboard or mouse, which is amazing. But then in China, they are going even further. So at Tsinghua University, now what they have been doing is they have developed a very special new materials you can put into your inner ear, just like my pearl earrings. You can see, you can put it there, and it can achieve the same kind of high quality, information exchange with your brain. So there is no even no surgeries at all. So some people start to say this kind of non-invasive brain-computer interface can be the ultimate solution to metaverse interaction at scale for everyone to participate. You can do that 24/7, and it's quite immersive, natural, comfortable, and safe. And also it can solve the problem, as Elon Musk says, address the issue of AI threats. So everything is moving very fast. Next slide. This is another thing I'm really interested, because a lot of discussion we are focusing now is very much on online safety. But we all know that the internet, a lot of things we are talking about now is only 5% called the clean web. So that's the one which we can, access through different search engines, say Google, Yahoo, Bing, etc. But actually underneath, there's another 95%, which is called deep web. That's not really accessible through any of the search engine we are doing on a daily basis. And among them, there is another 5% called deep web, which is full of criminal activities. So if we are saying, according to the white paper, that the metaverse is the next generation extension of Web3, of the decentralized internet, we shouldn't only focusing on the top 5, which is what we can see every day. What about the rest, 95% of the web, which are deep web or even dark web? So how do we address all this kind of criminal activities in other part of the web that we rarely see? I think that's a very interesting question. All of us need to work together to develop a solution. Next slide. And also, actually, the solution is already in place. So the UN Secretary General has established a very important framework called the Global Digital Compact for an open, free, and secure digital future for all. So all of the many different issues I have mentioned here is actually, being discussed at the top level between governments, private sectors, and the final result will be announced in a high-level conference in September next year. So I'm sure actually we can really utilize Metaverse for the well-being for everyone, just like the great work has already done by DCO and Whiteshield. Next slide. Okay, go back to you if you have any questions for me, Tom.
Thanks, Dr. Christina. I think very interesting to hear, about the transition and some of the challenges I think that we face with the human-centric, piece. I think it would be quite interesting, maybe just quickly even, some of these cases, practically that we're going to see where the metaverse will actually impact, us and kind of ourselves, if you will. So maybe it'd be quite interesting to hear just very briefly about those. And then, what we'll do is we'll switch to Philippe and to see what are kind of these technical specifications actually needed to, to realize some of this, some of these particular developments which you mentioned.
Sure. If we go back to the slides, I can continue. I think there has been lots of discussion about how Metaverse will really start to be more than a gaming environment. I think for ordinary citizens, if it's something to do with our own health, lifestyle, etc., that would be very powerful. So I would say in the next 5 years, perhaps the biggest opportunities for Metaverse to really achieve mainstream, mass adoption will need to start it at the individual user level, not necessarily through, say, the affordability of AR or VR glasses, but how actually we can use the digital twin of ourselves, the avatar, to have the opportunity to understand, how we can live a happy, healthy life based on different dietary or sleeping patterns or exercise patterns, etc. For example, if we can use the avatar created in the metaverse to link with our own health data, and it can tell me if I try to free myself from any kind of junk food in the next 5 years, that's going to, make me look like 5 years younger in 10 years' time. That's the kind of impact I think a lot of consumers will be very interested. So I think that will be the first level because it's linked with predictive healthcare. And also another very important part we know for many different countries, a large portion of their healthcare budget is actually used to treat people with very serious conditions at terminal stage. It's hugely expensive. But if we change the whole, paradigm into preventative and educate people to live much healthy and illness-free, it's good quality for people's life. That's what we call people-centered. And also another side is also saving huge amounts of healthcare budget for government worldwide. They can utilize that to make people's life better and more satisfactory. So I would say that's the first layer. And maybe the second layer is how on the city and country level we can use metaverse to help decision makers to make their cities more livable, sustainable, and participatory. And we know, for example, in Saudi Arabia, there is NEOM projects. There's many different infrastructure projects across Africa, across Europe, looking at how to make our city, more enjoyable by our citizens. So Metaverse can play a very important part in that. And I'm currently chairing a working group in the United Nations ITU to looking at how we can create people-centered cityverse to ensure our citizen will really become the leading player in future developments of cities using Cityverse. And of course, on the top level, I would say the people, planets, the planet elements is where we can use Metaverse to simulate how we can fight climate change by creating a digital Earth, in the computer, which has already taken shape by the European Commission. So they are putting in 150 million euro to create a destination Earth by 2030. So that will really allow us to see how Metaverse-related immersive technology can help us looking at different policy change, different behavior of individual citizens collectively to impact on the longer term climate change of our world, how to fight a climate change using this immersive participatory technology. That'll be very powerful. Thank you.
Thank you. And maybe, Philippe, so we've heard a bit about, some of the use cases, the overall development, but, fundamentally for someone like me, I've got my computer, I've got my mobile phone, I've got a tablet, which I barely use, how am I going to be able to access actually the metaverse? Is it through traditional devices? Is it through, the brain implant, for example, that Dr. Christina mentioned, from Neuralink? It'd be good to hear a little bit about the hardware needs, for people to in essence access this.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Tom. Well, Dr. Christina has given us a very good glimpse at the future of how we'll be accessing the metaverse, but also the web at large. But maybe let me take a step back, bring it back to how we've been accessing the metaverse so far, and what were the major impediments to the uptake of the metaverse. If I were to think of three main characteristics of the metaverse today, I would say that it is immersive, meaning it requires good human interfaces that allow us that immersive experience. It is interactive, meaning that it needs to react to us in real time and allow us to interact in real time, even if we're sitting at two different ends of the world. And finally, it's extensive, meaning it can scale up to millions and billions of users in the future. And so looking at these characteristics, I would say that the current state of affairs is around wearables and specifically headsets. The best way today to experience the metaverse is through headsets. We've seen major investment happening at this level. I mean, Meta's acquisition of Oculus a while ago is a testimony to that. You can see the amount of investment that Meta keeps backing Oculus with. And you can see currently with their new headset, the Headgear 2, that they've actually increased their sales tremendously over 2023. So while this has been traditionally a bit of an obstacle to access the metaverse, we can see more and more of an uptake. Now, speaking about headsets, you can see currently new trends as well. Apple had been notoriously outside this universe itself, and right now they've upscaled the experience with the Apple Vision Pro. Oddly enough, in the launch of the Apple Vision Pro, Apple didn't mention the word metaverse at all. Instead, they coined the term spatial computing, and they showed us a lot of different use cases that obviously are outside the metaverse experience as we know it today, but apply very clearly to the metaverse. So will Apple be able to democratize headsets the same way they did with the iPod, the iPhone, the iPad, and the iWatch? This is really the question to be asked. But also we can see a broader set of devices coming on the market today, as for example, the Meta Ray-Ban Stories eyeglasses. Now, we're talking about the extended reality experience being core to the metaverse. And these glasses are not XR glasses in any way. They're neither augmented reality glasses, not even virtual reality glasses, but they bring in new use cases and they usher a new era of integrating technology with day-to-day eyewear. But also it's a first example of a tech giant, Meta, collaborating very closely with a fashion giant, in this case, Luxottica Essilor, to bring to the market such devices. And this is definitely democratizing it. Now, we also see many players, mostly from China, going in with better and better equipment at lower and lower prices on a daily basis. Does that mean that the headset is going to be the only way to access the metaverse? Definitely not. It's the most immersive experience, but it's also one of several ways. Today, you can access and experience the metaverse on your phone. And this is becoming more and more ubiquitous with companies like Google embedding AI in their new Tensor chip and many others following suit, especially most recently, Qualcomm launching its latest Snapdragon chips, again, leapfrogging the competition on that front, or at least that's the current claim. We still need to see those in action. So more and more we're seeing the ability to better interact and better visualize, pushed to the edge, to the handset itself. And I believe we're going to see more usage of handsets, meaning of smartphones, to access the metaverse. I'm not discounting, finally, the use of laptops and, most importantly, high-performance gaming laptops to access the metaverse specifically for richer gaming experience or visual experiences per se. But for now, I think we're going to see a major uptake of smartphones in terms of day-to-day usage for the metaverse, while the headsets and eventually maybe the brain chip or the ear chip take over very quickly. And thank you, Dr. Christina, for showing these.
So Philippe, maybe you know, hardware itself, is obviously only as good as in terms of the network and the computational power, behind it, if you will. And we know at least that there are huge demands in terms of networks, in terms of both in terms of bandwidth needed, latency issues on one side, and then as well the computational capabilities to actually deliver these new virtual worlds. Can you even just talk, maybe just in a couple of minutes, what is the infrastructure requirements, the digital infrastructure requirements that are needed, and how close, are we to actually delivering on some of these, virtual worlds and these, real world rendering processes, if you will?
A very good question. Thank you, Tom. Well, maybe we should look at the metaverse in layers indeed. And this is something that Ahmad showed us earlier. Maybe I'll focus on three different aspects, and I'll extract three layers from the 6-layer model that Ahmed has shown us. And one of them is, of course, the human interface that we spoke about just now. But as you rightly said, there's more to it. So going down one layer deeper into the metaverse, I would talk about the automation and decentralization there. So I would talk about the role, the core role of AI for automation of the experience, for the interactivity with human and non-human proponents in the metaverse. And I would talk about blockchain, which is the core building entity, if you will, of the metaverse and the decentralized world that it's providing, which allows us to operate our identity within the metaverse, to validate our identity, if you will, and to carry our non-fungible tokens across the metaverse itself. So maybe if we talk about those, and then we talk about a third layer, which is the infrastructure layer. And at that point, maybe I'll talk about two elements of that infrastructure. One is the sheer compute power that we need with the metaverse, with that interactive, rich experience that it's providing. And two is the delivery of that compute power. So the connectivity that we're providing between the end user, the metaverse, the multiverses that are out there, and the various other end users. So I talk about the data center world and the compute power. Is it still centralized or is it being pushed to the edge? And we talk about the sheer broadband capabilities that are required to connect, especially in a mobile world today. So maybe I'll start with the technologies the software technologies that allow us to experience the metaverse. And most importantly for me, and one of the biggest hypes of 2023 is AI and its potential for automation. We've seen a major hype since generative AI came to market, and that offering became quite public. So on the technology side of things, Gen AI and AI in general means the proliferation of GPU-hungry data centers. So we're no longer talking about the traditional hardware architectures that we've seen throughout since the 80s all the way to the early 2000s, but we're talking about more GPU-hungry types of data centers. And we're seeing that race for the AI-embedded CPUs. As I just mentioned, Google with its latest Tensor chip, pushing AI as AI ready and AI embedded into their chip, and Qualcomm with the latest iteration of their Snapdragon chip. Now, these are quite interesting, but I think that the most interesting latest development on that front would be IBM's announcement of an AI-enabled CPU that abstracts the need for strong GPU power to be able to recreate AI and a rich environment, if you will, within the metaverse. I think this is a good sign of someone trying to leapfrog the competition and creating a broader channel, if you will, of technologies that we can rely on. Now, having said that on AI, let me move to blockchain. I don't have much to say here because the ubiquity of blockchain is all around us. We've seen blockchain adopted for over a decade with the Bitcoin and all the altcoins out there. We've seen real life use cases established beyond a crypto coin or cryptocurrency with traceability, and we've seen this across the board. We've seen it in agriculture, in the food industry, in finance, in logistics. We've seen it everywhere, and it's starting to become a reality across the board. However, where we've seen it advance really the fastest is in the metaverse. We've seen massively rapid uptake, and we've seen a diversity of use cases that has gone way beyond the real life. So in the metaverse, the usage of NFTs has taken up super rapidly, I would say. We haven't seen anything take off that quickly since, I would say, or until the advent of Gen AI. And most importantly, I would say from a blockchain perspective, we've seen the use cases of self-sovereign identity come across the metaverse. And we now see the importance of validation of identity and control of identity and own information. So with that said, on the first layer of depth of the metaverse, if you will, the software layer, maybe we can move on to a more tangible layer, which is the physical infrastructure. So
and maybe, Philippe, it'd be good, maybe just even touch on maybe 1 or 2 points. It would be quite good to hear about the physical. And then let's switch in as well with Ahmed, even just a couple of remarks then about, the role of international organizations, within this from what Dr. Christina and Philippe had mentioned about blockchain decentralization, and how some of these standards can actually support this. So maybe Philippe, even just a word or 2 quickly about infrastructure would be great. And then that'll lead into maybe some of the final remarks before we switch to questions.
Certainly. So 2 things about the infrastructure. The first is the massive compute power to enable the seamless experience. And that takes us to the world of data centers. Are we still looking at building larger and larger data centers that are centralized in global data hubs, or are we looking at pushing to edge data centers that are smaller, closer to the end user, and more distributed across? I think we're seeing more and more a case for the latter nowadays. In terms of the delivery, we're looking at moving from a 10 megabit internet experience that we're used to to the need for 100 megabit experience? Does that mean that the operators need to build networks that are 10 times faster? Does it mean that they need to invest 10 times more in their network topology? That's definitely not the answer, and that's not going to happen. But the interesting road here is the road to mobility with the advent of 5G and 6G on the horizon. This is where we feel the difference is going to happen. So this is it in short, and we can talk a bit more about the regulation needed around this, or the policies that will enable that. And I think this is where I hand it back to Ahmed.
Right, and maybe Ahmed, even just a minute or two, about the role, and Philippe started to touch on this point. What's the role of international organizations, to promote either in terms of common standards, to promote, accessibility, if it would be great to hear. And then two, we talk about, COP28's coming up, there's sustainable development goals. What's the role of Metaverse as well to support, the development of Metaverse to actually accelerate or to push forward, achieving some of these? So even a minute or so would be great just to hear your thoughts about this before we at least, able to get to some questions.
Well, thank you, Tom. No pressures. I represent the international organization, and I see all these discussions going around the role of collaboration, cooperation that could be facilitated through the international organization is key. We cannot afford to have that nationalistic or regional approach to policies and regulations anymore. So I think the role of international organizations is important or key, and it is multifaceted. Because these organizations are the means of the global multilateral cooperation and these types of dialogues around safe digital future for all. I think there are many points where international cooperation is needed, but I think I've mentioned I've shortlisted 4 of those. Number 1 is the effective governance of internet or Web3 or Metaverse, as we say it. So we have had a few experiments around governing the internet in the last 2 decades. There have been some lessons learned. We have made some mistakes. So especially when we talk about the competition aspects of it, and the whole debate about the technology, big technology companies absorbing the small startups, etc., etc. So I think we need to get the governance right, and that is where international organizations can play a key role in it. So we need to develop or agree on principles-based frameworks that would make Metaverse and whatever iteration of the web it is to be safe, open, accessible, inclusive, competitive. There's a emphasis on that, and human-centric. And we need that because we need to foster innovation, and we need to protect people and society from any potential harms that may come out of the emerging technologies. So that's number 1. The other thing, okay, so what we have been able to do well and very well is interoperability. So we have worked on the standardization. We have worked on different technologies being able to interoperate with each other. I think we need to continue that, but we are under immense pressure now because the innovation now is super fast. And it's very sporadic, metaverse or metaverses, or a whole iterations of AIs. So we need to double down our collective efforts, and we cannot miss the chance of having metaverses or metaverse or whatever we call it interoperable. And the international organizations like ITU are already doing some work on standardization. That's number 2. Number 3 is access and inclusivity. We need to work together, orchestrated by the multilateral organizations, that the metaverse access is not restricted to specific regions or demographies, etc., etc. So we need to bridge the digital divide. We need to make the broadband access affordable, and we need to promote inclusivity. And the fourth point, which will lead to your next question, Tom, is about sustainability. So we have a collective responsibility to ensure that while fulfilling our current growth ambitions, we do not jeopardize the interests of our future generations and the planet. And we will have to join hands, and international organizations have a key role to play to fulfill this responsibility while making a good progress towards our digital future. This now takes me, I'll take a minute to give you a few examples on how Metaverse and the emerging technologies can help achieve some of the sustainability goals or SDGs. So we've seen the slide from Christina where we have concerns about the sustainability and the compute power that all these emerging technologies are going to consume. But on the brighter side, I think Metaverse can help as an enabler to make good progress on the SDGs. For example, so we have healthcare and education. We've explored some of those use cases, Metaverse use cases, where we can enhance the performance on the SDGs that are related to healthcare and well-being and quality education, SDG 3 and SDG 4. The enhanced community engagement that could be powered by Metaverse can support the SDG 11 on sustainable cities. Efficient public services can be provided effectively through Metaverse, and there's a very interesting example of Colombia where the first court hearing happened in Metaverse, and the participants they appeared as avatars. And so there's that. Yeah. So and then Metaverse can play a key role in addressing some of the global challenges, including social exclusion and inequality that contributes toward SDGs 5 and 10. I have a long list, but I think being conscious of the time, I stop here, and I think I've answered the two questions that you have posted towards me, Tom.
Thanks, Ahmed. Maybe let's take even 5 more minutes since we started a few minutes late, and we can go through some of the, kind of the questions. I see that there's more and more, kind of questions starting to come in. So maybe I'll just select maybe a few, and particularly about topics maybe that we haven't necessarily touched on, as much, or maybe to highlight at least a couple of pieces. So there's a question from Radwa and then Michael, actually about copyright infringement, intellectual property rights, plagiarism, and then the question in terms of the digital twin with privacy, implications, and obviously with the personal data involved. And I think ultimately, what sort of privacy technologies or policies, should we actually be looking at to address, whether it be in terms of international organizations, Ahmed, as you mentioned, or maybe Dr. Christina, when you mentioned in terms of digital twins, what either technologies or policies, could be to support, that. So maybe Dr. Christina, if you want to take if you'd like to at least touch on that point from the digital twin, perspective would be quite interesting, because I'm sure that this is a topic on people's minds as to what this actually means for intellectual property, privacy, and so on and so forth, and what we need to do to address it.
Yeah, definitely. I think the IP issue is particularly important at this moment. As I mentioned that at this moment, a large number of Metaverse components is being massively produced through generative AI. And there is already a huge amount of controversies and debate on how to legislate around generative AI created intellectual property rights. At this moment, worldwide, no country actually allow AI to become the owner or creator of any IP except in South Africa. There has been one particular case filed by a US inventor with a generative AI machine. So that's already caused massive debates on whether or not they should be allowed in other parts of the world, because imagine in the future when more than 50% of the contents every one of us consume on a daily basis is generated through generative AI. So who should own that IP? Would this IP go back to the producer of the generative AI, the engineer who trained AI to do the image 3D models, or should that attribute back to the many, many millions of images human creator have, produced to train that AI? Or should the company who employ that engineer, pay for their salaries to own the IP? Is going to be massively, debatable. And I know the World Intellectual Property Organization, WIPO, is looking at this now, but it's very challenging. So I think maybe that can be an area for international collaboration moving forward, because or else no one wants to use generative AI to create any kind of, work in the future, because there's no IP protection. So that's going to be very problematic, either, within metaverse environments or when it goes to digital twin. Yeah, thank you.
Great, thank you for this, Dr. Christina. So maybe a question related to society, and there's two actually questions kind of associated with that, from Olitan and Radwa, about society, social interactions, and how things are changing with the rise of the metaverse. So Dr. Christina, you mentioned kind of Second Life, for example, that there's obviously then, there's massive, EVE Online and a whole host of different, platforms in essence for these new social dynamics, to play out, if you will. It'd be interesting to hear, maybe Ahmed, I'm not sure if you've had a thought a bit about this as well, a bit in terms of Philippe, as to how you actually see, or how we see actually societies, changing a little bit with regard to this, and how we could see this as well, within the future. Yeah, well,
I think a couple of quick thoughts. So, I mean, a lot of work that we do at an international organization is looking at the cross-jurisdictional nature of the digital economy, and the societies as we know them today. They are closed, they are conserved. The countries have their geographical boundaries. They keep them quite tight to themselves, right? So if we are entering a metaverse world, where all the features and all the transactions happen in a virtual world, and there are no borders, there wouldn't be, and the cultural and societal norms and compulsions are not going to be a part of these virtual worlds. It's going to be, I think it's going to put a lot of challenges towards the norms that we as humans are used to, or we are aware of. Again, it's going to be a curious case. And if you think of certain values or certain principles that have traditionally been not acceptable in certain parts of the world or certain societies, being subject to and opening up would have both risks and challenges and opportunities as well. So it can help us to evolve towards a more global society. Yet there are many nuances that would just come, and then we'll see how do we need to address those challenges.
Thank you. Maybe we'll do a couple more questions. We'll do it a quick, rapid kind of way. One, Philippe, I actually want to somewhat direct to you. So it talks a bit about accessibility from Tinwande, for example, from Canada. People in undeveloped countries engage with Metaverse. It talks explicitly about skills, but maybe to frame it around, the technology needs. So you articulated quite extensively about, the technological and, network and compute upgrades. How can we ensure access for people within different locations, or maybe they don't have access to such, kind of the rapid or computational power? I'll give you 1 minute though, so we'll go through this quickly.
All right. But I would say I'm less worried about the computation power than I am about the connectivity. In underdeveloped countries, I think connectivity is currently the main challenge. Now, with more and more satellite coverage coming in, and Dr. Christina gave us the example of Starlink, but also there are others, I would say within the next decade, we should see a democratization of this type of access to the point where the price point drops enough for this sort of satellite access to be available at very low prices in underdeveloped areas and across all countries. The focus is specifically on underdeveloped areas, and whether it's hot air balloons or satellites, there should be a way to cover large areas at a decent price point. When it comes to compute power, as I said, more and more compute power is being pushed into devices, and soon there wouldn't be the need to pay for an expensive high-end device to be able to gain access to a good chipset that allows embedded AI functionalities, that allows good visualization and rendering. So my idea is that this will happen through mobile devices with the help of better connectivity in underserved areas.
And maybe we'll do one last question, and maybe Dr. Christina, maybe I'll direct this one for you. When we talk about human-centric and how to make the metaverse a human-centric place, this is from Oyen from Nigeria. So this was referring to the gender disparities, the digital divide. How can women leverage the emerging metaverse to address these inequalities and gain or to access opportunities for employment. So maybe just even a quick minute so we can end it on that note.
I think the most important thing is really education. How can we have government to provide more funding to support girls to go into STEM subjects, study very early, and also to give them the confidence that they can become any kind of leader in all kinds of industry, whether it's prime minister of country or the next Nobel Prize winners in chemistry, or they can be the next billionaires. So they should be educated in the same way, like when I visit like Buckingham Palace, to looking at how Queen Victoria was educated in the first place. So she has confidence to become the best she can in her chosen field. I think that's most crucial for all our society to address gender equality. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I think with that, unless Ahmed, Philippe, any other last comments? We've got the challenge of the Metaverse challenge. Great, so many actually answers to this one. So it looks like, at least within first place, content regulation as the main challenge and complication of the Metaverse. I think that as well touches on a couple of the different questions, lightly or tangentially in terms of intellectual property, so on and so forth, that we're going to look at. User accessibility, the second one, it looks like. Interoperability at least in the third, and then of course, some others. So quite interesting to see at least where people are starting to see where some of these challenges are, and then obviously then where we need to look and address potential policy solutions and intervention, if you will. With that, unless any other final words from our panelists.
Yeah, I would just make one statement towards the end of it, and it is, so we've addressed and we have explored the different challenges and opportunities, but I think we believe that these challenges can only be effectively addressed through a multilateral and multi-stakeholder collaboration, and the human-centric development of Metaverse is at the core of it, and the policy making has to be all-inclusive. That's the closing sentence from me.
Well, thank you all. We appreciate, I think, the time. We appreciate the attendance, appreciate the great questions. We hope, obviously, that this session was as informative and entertaining, I think, as it was, for us. Great to experience and exchange some of the ideas in terms of the paper itself. Thank you, of course, to the panelists. Really appreciate it. Appreciate your thoughts, expertise, and obviously dialogue about some of these issues. And with that, maybe we end the session. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Please read our white paper, and please reach out to us if you have any questions, any further discussions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.